Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. The Second Amendment supporters from the right often ask us not to talk politics immediately after a school shooting. Well, thankfully today, that's not our predicament. People on the left might be thinking, Robert, right now we're focusing on a potential Trump coup and a Biden presidency with a woman of color for vice president. To hell with you both. This is important, and we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep listening. Today, public speaker and daughter of a school shooter, Carrah Quigley, and liberal gun enthusiast Owen Younger dive into the psychological reasons behind the violence of white boys with guns.
Don't take your guns to town, son. Leave your guns at home, Bill. Don't take your guns to town.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
And these images show that terrifying scene at STEM School Highlands Ranch after two students opened fire, children as young as kindergartners fleeing, and panicked parents waiting outside to find out if their kids were safe.
And this is our Western edition. Good evening. It began as an ordinary school day, and it was almost over when gunfire erupted this afternoon. This deadly mass shooting happened in Parkland, Florida, about 20 miles northwest of Fort Lauderdale at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Two students were killed and three others injured. The suspect, a 16-year-old boy, is now in custody in critical condition this morning. Matt Gutman is outside the high school in Santa Clarita with more. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Michael. This morning, investigators are trying to look into two things. First, what was the motive? What drove this 16-year-old boy on his birthday to try to go into his school and murder his classmates? The other is, where did he get that .45 automatic pistol? He unloaded the entire magazine. It took just 16 seconds to throw this entire community into chaos and grief.
We're here in front of the Newtown United Methodist Church, where we've watched people gathering all evening long. As tonight, the details are still pouring in. There are 27 victims, 20 children, 7 adults.
Shots fired. More shots fired, additional shots fired.
It has happened again. The recognizable dispatch audio.
They're having a shooting at the high school, have an officer down, shooter not in custody.
The familiar images of loved ones clinging to one another.
I've always kind of felt like eventually it was going to happen here too.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right. and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
I wish I was special. You're so fucking special. But I'm not free.
And today we're talking to my old friend, Owen Younger. Owen, happy to have you back, sir.
Thanks, man.
And Carrah, it's really cool to have you on. You have a particular interesting story with this whole thing because you've done multiple talks on it, and you know someone close to you that has experienced, how would you describe that? I don't even know how to say that.
The trauma of living in the United States and having amazing access to guns.
Exactly. You know, I was just seeing something, Biden's new plan. He plans to add a $200 price tag to every firearm or magazine that is purchased. You know, while I want to support any kind of common sense gun control, this one seems like it keeps the guns in the hands of the well-to-do and makes sure that regular Americans don't have guns, which I think is kind of what the government always wanted. You know, like I think they're totally fine with guns being out there. They just don't want to see them in the hands of maybe Black Lives Matter protesters, but they're okay seeing them in the hands of the Boogaloo Boys. You know what I mean?
In other words, you're calling that an elitist, sort of an elitist proposal by Biden?
Maybe, yeah.
I think that, you know, there's a lot of evidence that the NRA trucks in a bunch of guns into Southside Chicago. Oh. They're just really about gun ownership in general, making money. I think initially the whole gun ownership thing was racial. So as long as white people had guns, it was fine. And now I don't think they really care. We have 300 million guns in this country. And so I'm not sure that they are discriminating anymore about who owns them or why. I think that Biden's plan sounds interesting. I don't know much about it except from you, but there is no, there's no demographic necessarily for a school shooter or a mass shooter. There's a profile. There's no profile for it. And it's usually the last 2 years of a person's life before they commit the crime that really matters. That guy that shot up all those people in Vegas, he didn't want for money. He was rich. I think he was a millionaire.
Yeah, I think, he was clearly well-to-do. That one was weird. Paddock, right? Stephen Paddock.
Yeah, it was bizarre.
We jumped right ahead. Carrah Quigley, please tell us about your background, who you are. We jumped right in, That's great.
Yeah, I couldn't let that go.
No, fair point.
I'm Carrah Quigley, and I'm the daughter of a school shooter. I didn't know this until I was 19 years old, so I grew up and had all of my developmental, hurdles made, and grew up in a very loving, awesome, wonderful family, very educated people. My father was a hyper intellectual. My mother also extremely brilliant. At 19, he told me his story, and he planned a mass murder of his dormitory in 1955 on the Swarthmore campus, and one night snapped due to another episode of bullying, which he had been bullied since he was 4 years old, and found no escape except for some brief moments in high school. He went to an elite high school because he was very intelligent. And that was the only 5-year period really for him where there was no bullying. So by the time he got to college, again, it had started up. And he was the proctor, I guess is what they used to call it, the room attendant for the dorm. And he had the key to everybody's room. And when he snapped, he loaded himself up with ammunition and guns that he got from his house. He had driven back to his house and then come back to the dorm. He was in a state of total insanity, and he then kind of didn't know who to kill first. And he walked up and down the hallways and opened a door to one of the guys' rooms. And the reason why he opened the door was because there was a poster on it that said, said brains in the pawn. And he remembers one of the occupant of that room saying to him, "You see, I'm the brains and you're the pawn." And that sort of, I guess, is what made him open that door. And he shot into the dark and killed a fellow classmate. And then he proceeded to release the rest of his ammunition down the hallways. And then sort of, he had a revelation that he'd been loved more than he'd been hated, and that he needed to stop. So he says that a hand came and squeezed around his heart and then let it go. And that was sort of the moment where he felt that he had reached the end of his plan, so to speak. He got a classmate in another dorm and went to the police station in Swarthmore and turned himself in. And then he was found to be incurably insane, and he was sentenced to life at Farview State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Waymart, Pennsylvania in the Poconos. And he got out after 4 years and 9 months. And he was released. There was another sanity commission, which found him then, of course, to be temporarily insane. And whatever had brought him in there no longer affected him. And he came out and lived an incredibly normal life, if not a highly achieving life. He ended up getting his PhD in environmental psychology at Kansas University and went on to be a professor at the University of Arizona for 36 years. Highly regarded, highly respected.
Wow.
He had a really bad temper. He didn't know how to control his emotions. I don't know many men that can, actually. And I have shared with many of my friends the angers of our fathers and how destructive it can be. So I'm not sure that he was well outside the scope of the other fathers I can compare him to. But certainly in retrospect, you can look back and say, wow, how did you get it all back together again in the ways that you did? So, not without flaws, my father, as he recovered, but went on to live a pretty incredible life. And, as I learned this, I think it was 2 or 3 years, no, it must have been 6 years later, was Columbine. But remember, Columbine was the culmination of 5 other incidences that happened in those 3 months leading up to Columbine. There was Jonesboro, Arkansas, and several other places around the states that had those initial shootings. And school shootings have been happening since the 1840s in our country. So, it was just when Columbine happened that we really kind of woke up. But then we went back to sleep again, and we kind of just wake up and go back to sleep all the time. So that's the short of it, if that's even short enough.
Well, it probably wasn't long enough, because it sounds like there's so much more. You said a couple things right there I didn't even know. Did you know that, Owen, that there was multiple school shootings before Columbine?
I did.
Well,
we're in Texas and Arkansas. It's pretty close by when the Jonesboro thing happened. It was big news here. North Texas.
Well, Owen, would it be fair to call you a gun enthusiast?
In a former life, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm very much a liberal, which is becoming less and less unusual in Texas, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, they tried to tell us we were going to be a swing state. I wasn't buying it when they said it. I'm like, you don't know the Texans I know, but
that's right. When my wife and I put up the Biden-Harris 2020 sign with the subtitle that said obviously, all of a sudden the 5 other neighbors had to put up "Stop this socialism" and Trump and whatever. Anyway,
the trick is to electrify your political sign. Just hook up some kind of current to it.
Exactly. So fortunately, in our neighborhood, nobody's really challenged us, and the neighbors are still very cordial, and they knew that we were liberals when we moved in. So we don't really. I walk around outside with a T-shirt on that says "This atheist votes." So there's no doubt, I think, in anybody's mind, my wife and I are lefties. Setting that aside, I'm a native Texan, and the first 30 years of my life, I was right-leaning. I grew up in a right-leaning family. I voted straight-ticket Republican for many years. But the cognitive dissonance in my mind kind of became overwhelming. And I about 10 years ago, maybe even – so I abandoned the Republican Party 20 years ago. I just that was a very difficult thing to sort of follow. Horrible arguments and ideas. But the total path – leftward for me really kind of began in earnest maybe 10 years ago. And I realized I was certainly an independent and increasingly really very much a Democrat, even kind of a full-throated progressive, but I'm unusual in the liberal community, particularly in the places where people come and talk and share ideas. As a vestige of my former life and my former sort of political affiliation, I am a gun owner. I live in Texas. I grew up with firearms all around me. When I would go out to visit my grandparents in East Texas on the farm, one of the things we would do is go shoot guns. And for me, that was normal. I was given as a Christmas present my first firearm at age 7.
At 7?
A break action 410 shotgun that I still own. It really never slowed down. I own my unfair share of firearms, and I'm very conflicted by that because there is not one single good reason for a human being to own that many firearms. It's an increasing struggle with me to even kind of get my head around the idea that civilians ought to own them at all. Although in the United States, it is, whether we like it or not, it is a constitutional question. I mean, we can argue about what the clauses of the Second Amendment actually mean, but it's a very difficult matter to pass universal legislation that would be very effective and that would almost be essential. And Robert, you and I have talked about that on your podcast previously.
Yeah.
In fact, we had one podcast dedicated to that. We don't have to revisit all that. But this idea of gun violence generally is hugely problematic, hugely with an H, not a Y, and it's something we have to address. And I'll add this, that school violence strikes us in a special place because we associate schools with children, and we associate children with needing to be safe and peace and happiness and laughter, and places where children congregate should almost be sacred, right? And so when we see a school shooting, it has an outsized impact on our perceptions of violence and what that violence meant. And I don't want to minimize that at all, because I think that visceral reaction we have is going to help us, the liberals in the world, make progress on the kinds of gun laws that will help stop the gun violence problem. But with respect to the gun violence problem, what I have to say is that while school shootings are an impactful element on the sort of the American psyche when we take in stories about violence, school gun violence is a subset of all gun violence. And as a practical matter, 85% of children who are killed by guns, and I looked this up today according to the FBI, 85% of children who are killed by guns they're killed at home by guns, not at school. Wow. And depending on the year, between 30 and 40, sometimes slightly more, thousand Americans die in gun violence. And this is a true statement. If there were no guns, those deaths would not happen. It's a bullshit argument to say, well, if you want to kill somebody, you're going to use something else. No, it's not. That's not true. That's just not true at all. And so when we're looking at the problem of violence in schools, I think the first observation I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. I beg your pardon. The first observation I would make is let's keep that in perspective. Kids are more likely to die by choking. Kids are more likely to die by drowning. Kids are dramatically more likely to die in car crashes than they are by violence at school. But if we let the impact of school violence help us with our cause of reducing gun violence overall, I don't want to take a morally perilous position and say that anything good ever comes from violence. But if it helps us achieve an end that makes the world safer, then I'm going to ride that train.
Maybe something comes out of it to evoke change.
Right.
Whereas, you know, people just don't see it.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. I'm going to mute myself.
No. Everything you said was amazing. I just want to say something about what you're saying is true, but I also have to add something to it. A school shooting, if you look at the deaths and you measure deaths, school shooting deaths versus kids who die at home, that's a true statement. You can look at that on a piece of paper and think about it that way. When you deal with a school shooting, however, what I'm concerned about, or where I try to focus, is the kids who slipped in the blood of their classmates as they left that building, or the teachers that were wounded, or the people that had to wait outside waiting for their child. There is a higher level of trauma that extends out for the survivors that is not the same as a domestic problem. A domestic problem affects the family. The mass shooting at a school affects thousands and thousands and thousands of people out to the buffers of who those people interact with. It affects entire communities and towns and counties and states. I think the whole of El Paso was mortified by what happened at Walmart. And I think that anybody in that building is still existing with trauma. So we have to look at trauma as a symptom of these mass shootings in a way that's different from the trauma that exists in smaller numbers with the families. And I don't want to get into comparative suffering. It's all awful. That's not my point. My point is to just look at death doesn't explain the whole picture of what's happening to us mentally as a country as we try to cope, because we also are a country that is inept at healthcare, inept at mental care, inept at funding for any of these things. So the wound is deeper than just the death.
That's an excellent point.
What creeps me out is my kids talk about school shootings all the freaking time. I drop them off in the morning. We have a neighbor that picks them up in the afternoon, but I want to say it probably comes up a couple times a week where we're just driving to school. There'll be some kid walking, on the side of the football field or something, all black, mask on. So that's the common joke. Everybody's wearing masks and thinking about school shooting now and stuff in these schools. And they'll just, as we're driving by, they'll say something like, "Oh, there's a shooter." And it's almost like,
that's not normal.
It's not normal. But it is now. It is for these kids. It's become they all talk about it all the time. And one thing that was really bizarre is the teachers were telling me bullying has gone down because they're all afraid if you say the wrong thing to the wrong kid. And whenever you start picking on another kid, other kids will let you know, "Oh, hey, be careful. You don't want to push them too far." What the hell? Not that I'm pro bullying, but this is crazy.
My wife and I don't have children. I'm in my late 40s, and just that wasn't something that I was going to do. Mm-hmm. And because I don't have children, I'm not really around. I'm not in an environment or a circle where people are going to inform me of bullying trends. And this is the first I'd really heard that it's possible that fear and anxiety associated with active shooter events could have actually affected the psychology of all children and reduced bullying. That's a fascinating outcome. Just wow, I'm still kind of digesting that, really.
Yeah, I think there's layers though there. There's a concerted national effort to get rid of bullying on behalf of mental health professionals and principals and teachers. So I think there's layers to that. And then the layer that Robert pointed out, which is hurtful to, I think, the mentality, is that kids are being nice because they're afraid, instead of being nice because they want to be nice. And again, putting fear into all of that. I mean, no child should ever have to think about getting shot while they're learning about, whatever it is they're learning about.
The multiplication tables.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, how much of this is media? I know we're so sick of that old trope of, well, the media is just hyping it up. And right after a shooting, the media is talking about it, and all the people on the right say, not yet. We need time to heal. You're just using this to get your agenda. But how much is the media affecting kids?
We have an example that we can look to that is somewhat similar. In the 70s, a number of psychologists and communications academics looked at incidences of suicide following media reports of suicides. And it didn't take very long for the academics that were conducting these studies to recognize clusters where once a suicide was reported, that got in the heads of 57 other people in that town who all had been suffering from depression or something else, and it gave them the idea, and it triggered a whole bunch of people to kill themselves. And at some point, the media stopped reporting on suicides. And the data is clear. I claim no expertise in this particular field, but the studies are out there and the data is clear. And there's a reason now that news stories never, ever include reports of suicides. So to some degree, the very presence of the reporting is, there's no doubt, and this is the trauma that she was talking about, the presence of that trauma in the minds of the people who are now receiving the horrible messages that were there. It's definitely impactful. I mean, it reaffirms what Carrah said, and it's the media by and large doing the reporting. Word of mouth and the effect of people in towns and communities talking to each other, certainly that's there. But in the broader picture of the media, if the media didn't report it, if you didn't live in Columbine, you weren't going to know that there was a shooting there.
It's interesting that people are also reporting that the availability of information about natural disasters in other countries also creates a ton of anxiety that we wouldn't have known before. 100 years ago, we wouldn't have known about an earthquake in Iran until a few weeks later. But now in real time, we know when all these things are happening, and we get flooded with information that, I mean, we could argue that, a mass shooting in Maine affects us all as a nation, but the people who are vulnerable, in Duluth, listening to the information, are going to be overwhelmed and creating more anxiety, more vulnerability. So even just the information can be dangerous. And let's also talk about, which is a subject that's hard for me to talk about, don't focus on the killer, because we know that the guys in Columbine researched and made models out of Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh loved David Koresh, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a correlation between the celebrity, quote unquote, of a killer. My problem with that is, while I agree that the exposure can be detrimental, we also can't forget the why. We have to understand the trajectory of a person's life and how they lived in this society amongst us, with us, and then eventually decided that, hey, this option of killing people was my only option available to me after living this long in this society. So that's why I always like to point out that their actions are on us. This is, we live in a society, and the more we keep saying, like, I have nothing to do with the guy that went and got guns and killed somebody, we absolve ourselves of any responsibility for creating the world in which we have.
That's a good point. I circle back to the thoughts that I had in the earlier information sharing that Carrah and I had, and she made the point about the trauma really being different for an active shooter event in a community, and that's an excellent point. I take a step back from that and I say, of all of the 30 or 40 or 45,000 deaths in the course of a year, every single one of those, in terms of gun deaths, they're all preventable. There are things that we can do. There are actions we can take collectively through our political leaders.
What things, Owen? What things can we do?
Let me just say this. If we can do things to reduce overall gun violence, then I think that we can also impact in a positive way subsets of that gun violence, for example, school shootings. Let's look at the problem. Is there something we can be doing that's different from what we're doing now to help address this problem? And what are those things?
Conflict resolution people, they're really interesting. If you talk to urban conflict resolution people, they'll say this statistic that I find fascinating because it seems so vague and yet so obvious. The source of every crime is anger. And so what is it about anger that we're not dealing with or teaching people to cope with or helping them understand about what is controllable about what they're experiencing emotionally? And why is it that it's so out of control that the only way to solve anything is to, threaten people with their lives? How did you go from not understanding what's going on in your life to your solution being, we have to threaten people? And sometimes I think that's the American way. And sometimes I think we've left our boys behind. My talk usually focuses on how we leave boys behind. We only allow boys to have joy and anger, and that's it. They have joy in their sporting events. They have anger at their, family members or life or whatever fantasy we have built for them to measure against, and they're not measuring up against it. It causes a lot of frustration. And white men, it's white men. There's not black mass shooters, and there's very few black kids who have been responsible for gun violence at school.
Yeah, why is that? What is going on with young white males right now? I know, I'll be honest with you, when I was, 13, right around the middle school years, I thought about shooting up the school all the time. I really did.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it was like a little fantasy thing, and it would be up there right along with, the study hall teacher chick was hot, and then I would think about shooting the school. It would come and go, you know what I mean? And it was never like I really believed in my head I would do it. It was just nice to have that as an option, I think. Maybe it was comforting to know, because I got picked on a lot at that time, and it was comforting to know I have options. Even though that's a horrible thing to say, you know what I mean? But I think
I'm so glad you said that, because the lines of men in their 70s that come, not saying you're in your 70s, I'm just saying that because they fit my dad's age.
Sure.
When they come and speak to me after I've given my talk, there's a line of them with tears in their eyes talking about their bullying experiences and saying, I could have been your dad. I planned to kill my teacher. I planned to kill my classmates, and I never went through with it. So we've got a bigger problem on our hands. And these are guys who were, in school in the 40s and 50s. So this has been going on for ages. If you look at my dad's artwork as a child, it all was on this idea of killing everybody and saving the planet.
Jeez. Okay. So if I hate to cut you off, but I'm going crazy with this next question to ask. So if this isn't necessarily a new thing psychologically for white young males, or for men, we'd just say it generally that way at least, what did change then? Because if man hasn't changed, at least mentally, emotionally, then did we change some laws that caused this, or is America just depressing?
Semi-automatic weapons. I mean, Justice Scalia's interpretation of the Second Amendment, you look at the proliferation of gun ownership after that, it's without question that had an influence. I know people get mad at me for bringing up movies and games, but I have to say, they add something to it. I'm not saying it's just games. I'm not saying it's just movies. I'm saying look at the combination of everything and look at the highly dualistic way in which we present arguments to people, us versus them, good versus evil, heaven versus hell. We get locked into these either ors as a form of argument, rather than being able, as we are doing now, to look at the layers, look at the exceptions, look at the possible ways in which we can critically think about what's happening. I think also greater income inequality. I think also, remember, we're not living as good as our parents did. So the promises given to us haven't changed, but the actuality of living them has, almost disappeared. So I think that, people always point to the angry white male feeling like they're being left out. And I think certainly when you measure that up against the boomer generation, it is being left out. So I think it's increasing for all of those reasons. But please add to that. You guys know more than I do about guns, certainly.
You're not a gun owner yourself, Carrah?
I wouldn't touch one, ever.
In a situation of self-defense, would that be an option then, where you would say if you lived in a dangerous neighborhood, per se, where there was, violence occurring regularly, home break-ins, in that case, would you consider keeping one for your own protection?
I feel like that's such a strange fear to live with. And I think it's also... I always make fun of these guys that are like, I have it for self-protection. I'm like, you really think you're going to walk down the stairs like everybody in those movies, and quietly shuffle away and then be able to come around the corner and turn to the perpetrator and kill him, I mean, I would love to see the statistics on successful home invasions where the owner was able to take care of something. I think, the number is minimal. But why wouldn't I, if my neighborhood is dangerous, why wouldn't I do what it took to make it safer? Why wouldn't I, engage the school board and increase education? Why wouldn't I go to the governor or the city council person and try to improve my neighborhood? Why wouldn't I do the work it took to make everything better rather than sitting at home waiting for some invader with my gun in my lap?
Yeah. Owen, would you ever say that the idea of being, like Chuck Norris in some action movie is kind of like how a lot of guys see themselves? I mean, I have a gun, I don't have like an arsenal like yourself, but I have a 38, and my idea is I just want to win. Like I have people that are counting on me in this house to not lose that day. So I'm going to take every advantage I can. But at the same time, I'm fully aware that having that in the house is dangerous because the kids can access it. Or, what if I get real sad? You know what I mean? Like it's
right. I remember doing some research leading up to the last podcast recording I did with you on guns. And I can't remember the exact statistic, but something like half of all gun deaths in America are self-inflicted. They're suicides. It's not something we talk about a lot. The media doesn't do news stories on suicides anymore, so that kind of maybe flies below our radar a little bit. But the statistics show, the academic research in this field is absolutely clear. Over and over and over and over again, with two equivalent situations, all other conditions being equal, ceteris paribus, if there is a firearm present, there's an extraordinarily higher likelihood that violence of any kind will occur, let alone gun violence, than would occur if no firearm were present. There is clearly something about the psychology of a gun that absolutely, and the data shows this, and I didn't use the Chuck Norris thing, that was your reference, but that there is kind of Chuck Norris effect that makes people sort of bow up and be willing to escalate in a situation where they wouldn't otherwise do that. The presence of a firearm in a home, and the data shows this without question, the presence of a firearm in a home dramatically increases the likelihood that a firearm, that or some other, will lead to a death in that home. And there's no doubt about that. That study has been done thousands of times by academics, and the CDC is not allowed to do it because political bullshit. But that data is clear, and so there is a psychology problem. And Carrah said something that really resonated with me. Are we? These shooters are rarely women. For that matter, is it extraordinarily rare for a serial murderer to be a woman? That's part of the profile. You always assume it's a man doing it. Or is there something, whether it's a gun or not, if we're looking at gun violence as a subset of all violence, which also can be helpful for us to sort of figure out strategies for dealing with the problem that we've identified, then what are those common threads? And Carrah said something about are we leaving our boys behind? Are we teaching this is the Gillette ad, right? Is there something toxic about masculinity that is somehow failing to teach little boys to find nonviolent ways to resolve conflict or deal with disagreement, or even if it's not anger, right? Even just to deal with disagreement or disparities in how you feel about something, right? Are we doing something wrong there? And now I have gone all the way outside of any kind of expertise I have about anything. So I'm going to stop talking.
Well, but you're an expert on being a man. Can any of you name a hero from the Greeks on up that didn't carry a weapon?
No. I mean, nobody really thinks of like Shakespeare as a hero or Plato or, you know what I mean? Or anything like that. We're talking about
I would have gone with Charles Darwin.
Well, he's your
but
hero.
That's an intellectual hero, right? We're talking like who influences boys? You know what I mean? Like Achilles and and even on prime time, when you look at prime time and all the shows that are on, is there a main character that does not hold a gun or have a gun?
No, not really.
MacGyver never really carried a gun.
Yeah.
Okay.
MacGyver was cool.
That's still 20 years ago, though, right?
Right. And he was also full of shit. But I mean, that's okay. That's a whole other thing. You're right. I mean,
the proliferation of it and the normal, the way in which we think about it. So my question to you is, do you actively think about somebody invading your home on a regular basis?
Oh, yeah.
I have and I've never talked about this on this podcast. And I'm almost reticent to bring it up. My wife and I are victims of a stalker.
Mm-hmm.
And
holy shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Felony indictments. This person is now on a lifetime protective order. The address where we live is actually protected. Like, you can't, even my voter's registration is secret. It's yeah, I mean, I'm not in witness protection or anything, but I'm in an address confidentiality program. All my mail.
Are you a former Scientologist?
No.
Okay.
No, ma'am. Former Christian, which is almost as bad. A fundamentalist.
There's a
Joe
big
Biden's
difference.
A Christian.
But,
There are differences. That in Texas, trust me, it's special down here. By the way, I'm going to get back to my question in a minute. But what part of the country are you in, Carrah? If you don't mind my asking. Kansas City. Okay.
Missouri.
Right.
Super Bowl champs.
I was going to ask if y'all had a football team. But anyway, just trying to remember if there was one there.
Yeah.
So
it's not in Kansas.
Right. So there is absolutely truth in this idea that we have idealized or fantasized this macho, sort of robust defender, this guardian idea, the Chuck Norris, right? And that guns are something that are normal and appropriate. And as a child, I had toy guns. And as an adult, and I realized this years ago, I'm not a parent, but if I were, I would never in a million years allow my children to have a toy that was a gun. That is categorically inappropriate. That teaches every possible wrong lesson that could be taught about guns or about conflict or about things that are cool. Guns ought to strike terror in the hearts of children and of people who are not trained to use them and employed in a profession where they are essential, like military or law enforcement. Popular culture, which is aided and abetted by a subset of the population that idealize firearms, has done a great deal of damage in how we perceive the need to have one.
Wow. Let's go deeper with that, because I think there's even more cognitive dissonance if we're allowed to get even deeper. As kids, I remember, all the boys played cowboys and Indians, and no teacher stopped them and said, that's a genocide.
You are so right about that.
I mean, nobody stopped and said, wait a second, this is not appropriate. This is a genocide. This is a horrific scar, wound, still bleeding actually, on our nation. And so we're going way back, that this was a game. This was something that was fun. This was how the kids at recess burned their calories, reenacting a genocide. And I think that we just really haven't come to terms with that what violence is, what violence does to people, how it affects them for the rest of their lives. Again, I just wanted to make that point because as you were talking, I kept thinking, but wait a second, you're given a gun as a little boy and you go off and play with it and reenact things from history that you think are fun.
Right.
I'm actually feeling angry right now, listening to the two of you. And I like, with each thing that you're saying, I'm like, get out of here. This is ridiculous. What you're telling me, playing cowboys and Indians with my son is irresponsible? Like, that sounds so stupid. But then at the same time, you use that word cognitive dissonance, Carrah, and I think that's part of the frustration that I'm actually feeling is, well, on one end, I'm like, whatever. Like, we'll play with guns if we want to. Come on. What are you kidding me? But at the other point, you're not wrong. The logic is sound. We really do, like, as a nation, kids are playing or reenacting a genocidal historical moment. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah. If
you look at it, just Google yoga poses on the Holocaust Memorial. You know, I mean, people still are not getting this. They don't get, like, my last talk I gave is about sitting in horror, what it means to sit in that horror and observe every facet of it. And you could Google this and you'll just see the Berlin Holocaust Memorial, everybody doing yoga poses on top of it. Jesus.
Wow. As a mockery or like?
Yeah. Or they go into the killing fields in Cambodia and take selfies, or selfies in front of, Work Sets You Free at Auschwitz. I mean, it just isn't. When I was at Parliament of World Religions, and the guy from Cambodia, he's Burmese. He's Burmese, and he's what is their name again? The Moringa? Is it the Moringa? Am I saying it right? The Muslims in Burma. Okay. I'm forgetting the name. I know I'm mispronouncing it. Anyway, he accepted an award about human rights, and the first thing he said was, "When you come to the killing fields and you want to take a tour, please don't get a selfie." Because that is the genocide, and you're getting a selfie on top of a graveyard. I think that there are, many graveyards in the United States that we are not accounting for, and we continue to just sort of play on this land, Yeah. So I think, and I say this in almost every talk I give, until we deal with the original wound, we're not going to really be able to understand the way we behave in such flippant ways with violence.
Right, it's right. Incidentally, Rohingya, I looked it up while you were.
Rohingya, thank you.
Yeah, that's it. You were very, very close. I want to add something else, but it layers onto what you said. Even setting aside cowboys and Indians, when I was a kid, the Rambo movies I'm 47 years old. The Rambo movies came out when I was, 8, 10, 12, 14, something.
I remember.
Every kid I knew wanted to be Rambo. Every kid I knew wanted to be a commando. When I remember for Christmas when I was like 10 years old, I asked for a set of camouflage clothes and even camouflage face paint, and it was the cool thing. Everybody on the block, we would go out and we would have wars. And those of us who weren't cool enough to have toy guns would actually use sticks and pretend they were rifles. We would run around shooting each other. You look at that and part of you says, you know what, boys will be boys, whatever. But what are they doing, right? They are glorifying, reenacting, having fun with this idea, with this representation of violence. That there is nothing glorious or beautiful or great about a war. The only thing wars do is fucking kill people, lives that are snuffed out that didn't have to be if there weren't more adults in the room to be reasonable with each other. And I am, so I'm not going to say I'm a pacifist, but I will say that our military is overused. I think that we, as a society, have accepted as normal this idea that it's okay to glorify war, it's okay to glorify violence.
Owen, this isn't anything new.
We have deep problems psychologically, and addressing the problem with violence in America has to really kind of happen. You can't just pass a law to make this go away. You've got to get into the minds and into the hearts, if you want to sort of think of it that way, of the public, and fundamentally change how Americans feel about all of these sort of social inputs, popular media and culture, and how violence is represented and thought of in the minds and hearts of people all over the country, right? Sorry, go ahead.
But there's so many things I could say right now. I mean, first of all, I want to say I never saw Rambo, but wasn't Rambo a Vietnam vet?
Mm-hmm. He was.
Okay, so didn't he go back to get revenge or something?
So he was sent back by the government to go find other prisoners of war.
Right. So the Vietnam vet thing is lost on the audience, right? This idea of the trauma of a Vietnam vet, right?
That was the first one. Yeah. The first one was actually all about how we do treat our vets like crap.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, they take that actually had like a real message to it. And then they're like, well, let's make some money on this. And they just have him beating up whoever the bad guy is in that decade at the time. So, it's like he's beating up on Asian people, and then he's beating up on Muslim people. And then now the Muslim people are his friends, or, each step of the way, it's like whoever America hates, that's who Rambo gets to go shoot.
Right. So the laziness in storytelling and story receiving, I talk a lot about storytelling in many different talks I give. If you look at Jarhead, remember, I never read the book, but Jarhead, the movie.
Oh, yeah.
He was so observant that the people couldn't understand that the war movies they were watching were anti-war movies. They couldn't get that, like, hey, this is a commentary. The Deer Hunter, my favorite movie of all time, is a commentary on the damage and irony of America. Apocalypse Now, and is an anti-war movie. I mean, all these films are done to show the horror of war, and all these guys were getting was war, 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 yay! You know, it was totally lost on them. So again, I'm going to go back to the idea of critical thinking, that our lack of critical thinking, our lack of ability of critical thinking is the reason why we can't solve this problem. We get lost in emotions all the time. And also this idea that our military is overused. I think the violence of our military is overused. I think that there's so much about our military that's incredible, that could be doing incredible things, that could be building bridges and building highways, and could be, you know, going in for peacekeeping missions. And as, you know, General Wesley Clark used to say, whatever happened to ingratiating ourselves with people? You know, whatever happened to building hospitals and repairing damage because of I mean, I know it started before this, but our lovely sociopathic friend Dick Cheney just used the military as just purely a violent force. I think, you know, I'm not one of these people that's against the military. I think we need a strong and robust defense, but I think there's other things we could be doing with it.
Yeah. And as a child, right? I'm sorry, Robert, I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I'm getting angry.
As a child, I didn't recognize that what I was doing was glorifying and reenacting violence and associating that with fun and pleasure and satisfaction. These are things that should never, ever be connected psychologically in any way. So when those kids grow up, and they live in a home, and they live in a community where everybody believes that you've got to walk around with a 6-gun on your hip. We have open carry in Texas. If you want it, you got to go get the license for it. But very rarely do I see people walking around with guns on their hips, other than police officers, thank God. But strictly speaking, it's legal, and there's definitely this macho component to it. And for a person that grew up associating the reenactment of violence with firearms, with pleasure and satisfaction and happiness and joy, that is it any wonder that those people grow up and then want to have a lot of guns? The answer is no. There's nothing unusual about that at all. We taught them to be that way. We raised them that way.
We've always been this way.
I'm sorry, I'm going to climb down off my soapbox now.
How much of that is influenced by the Old Testament God?
Oh, a lot.
You know, kill them every one, and we're justified in doing it because we're the chosen people, and we've grafted ourselves onto the Hebrews, grafted ourselves onto everybody else. So that, you know, I mean, if you read Robert Allen Warrior's article, Cowboys, Canaanites, and Indians, he links the whole genocide of the Indians to the Old Testament. Go into the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey, and kill them every one. So he says, don't hold the white man that responsible, because they're actually following their book. They're following their religion, just as we would do.
Yep.
Okay, hold on.
That's absolutely true.
Guys, this cannot be the solution. It can't. I know that you're not saying that this is the only solution. There's many of them, and right now you guys are focusing on one that we definitely should be talking about: mental health of men and stuff. But this can't fix it. Because this is who men are. We're not a bunch of dudes frolicking in the flowers. You know what I mean? And then,
but is that the only alternative to being healthy and together and integrated? Frolic in flowers?
Because. No, it's not a false state. It's not a dichotomy, at least. But I would say this is part of being a man. This is not just like part of being an American, where there's definitely something going on with America and machismo stuff and toxic masculinity and all that. I'm with you.
Availability of guns.
And the availability of guns. Absolutely. But we can't try to solve the problem by saying, let's address men being aggressive. Well, that's what we are. And if you're the guy that's not aggressive, I'm going to be the guy that comes over and takes your stuff, you know?
So it's possible. So I'm not going to disagree with what you're saying, Robert, but there's a difference.
Right. Like I'm not necessarily defending violence. I'm just saying that men are violent things.
Men are physically stronger. Men as an outcome of evolutionary processing. We certainly have a different way of thinking about things, and certainly due to physical strength, certainly have been evolved to be the protectors, right, or the hunters. But there's a difference. When you add a firearm to a situation where other conditions are equal, you're going to more likely have escalations of violence. Do you suppose that men in Germany or France or Norway are any less masculine than men in America? Probably not.
France, but yeah.
What I would say is the men in those other countries did not grow up in a culture where violence and firearms and guns were idealized almost, where in order to be a man, you had to have one and you had to be good at using it. There is a difference. I think you can be a healthy male person and not have an obsession with firearms and not think that you have to be Rambo. And so I think that's the difference. I think you can expect men to be the products of evolution that they are and be somewhat different from women, but still not have an unhealthy fixation on violence or the need to walk around with a gun or to have 50 of them or to need to go shoot people.
Okay, so what can
I got a smile
fix?
from Carrah, so maybe I'm going in a good direction here.
I'm smiling because I'm waiting to hear Robert digest that.
Yeah, well, I agree. My point.
So I'm
overall,
right. I'm brilliant. Thanks.
Well, you're both right. I just don't think that we're gonna fix male aggression. You know, like
No,
if that's
but aggression can be very different than tipping over into violent, murderous rage.
Exactly.
I think there's also, we don't give men the opportunity to channel that aggression into anything except stomping on other people necessarily. We tend to reward, and this is so evident now, we tend to reward more sociopathic types of thinking and being now. You know, that the less emotional you are, the better you must be at leadership. And now we're in a really big problem with that. Again, there's a lot more texture, but I once learned something from a classmate at seminary before I dropped out, where she said, people will get away with what they know they can. And there's an ethos in certain cultures. Now, I know that the Japanese, for the rape of Nanking and all the other things that they did militarily, they are violent militarily, but in that culture, they're not. So the Japanese culture they're not having a problem with a bunch of murders and even stabbings, or they're not even having a problem with shoplifting, you know? Now, some of that is a Shinto and filial piety thing, which is also oppressive. But there's not this need to go get guns and kill people in a lot of different societies because they know they can't. They can't get away with it. The availability is not there, and they would never do it. Even in Switzerland, where almost every single person owns a gun in Switzerland, there's just an ethos that says you are not allowed to do that, and that is not okay. They also have healthcare and mental health care, just saying. So we're losing the battle on so many different avenues that I think taken as a whole, you're going to be able to keep this masculine thing you talk about, Robert. You're able to keep all of that, but because of a unified ethos, they're not going to cross a line, or they're going to say, I think I need help. I think something's happening. And also, I want to point out, think of how many school shootings we've prevented, because it's going to be triple the number that actually happen.
Wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, okay, how about this? And you guys are not going to like what I'm about to say, and my listeners won't like it either, because it's primarily a liberal listener base. What if, I'm throwing this out, hypothetical, but it seems like part of the answer here. What if we as a society had kind of set up certain things in place that directed how young men act, what their character was like? We got these instructions from churches. We got them from not necessarily a good home life for the woman, right? Because she was subjective to the man. It wasn't until very recently in human history that women have been at least getting a taste of equality. But that still worked. That home unit worked. These family values seem to work to some degree to project what a young man would turn into, and that would be a man that isn't a school shooter, for example. Is it possible? Is it? I know I'm already hearing it coming at me, but I'm just saying, is it possible that we have left some of those kind of character building values, and today, even though the benefits of liberalism are always fairly obvious, at least to me, but maybe we left some stuff that we shouldn't have?
So this is the Gillette ad, right? I mean, this is the Gillette razor ad that raised so much indignation, trying to put side by side this idea to bifurcate the different ways you could be a man. I think that ad raised so much ire and indignation because it made an exceptionally good point. We've got a lot of work to do, but there are ways.
I didn't like it. I didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
I don't like the whole corporate thing.
Because you're not a good liberal.
No, it's just I didn't like the whole corporate thing, trying to like get into politics, because I know it's all BS. You know, the whole Nike thing, it's all BS. The whole Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google. It's better for their ad building business if they say something that's popular. You know what I mean? Because they know these conservative things keep going away. So they're not going to invest money in something that's not liberal, because the liberal thing, that's going to be the new hot thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's totally off topic. I didn't like the ad.
It's your podcast. It's your podcast, and you can decide what the topics are. Sorry, Carrah.
Well, I just, gosh, Robert, you're going to hate me. And, I
will not.
I want to create a really good discussion, but I have to say this. The fallacy of the golden age, I feel like, is remarkably sexist and racist. The 1950s were full of Valium, alcoholism, racism, secrets, repression. It was a horrible time. Mm-hmm. And yet the media or the pop culture industry will make us think that this was the perfect time, that this was the time in which we got it right. And all that is a painting. The absolute destruction of families living with such grief and such horrific shell shock and PTSD from World War II. I mean, the GI Bill, I think, even though it was really just benefiting white men, helped in that it did increase the education level as a whole for the country. But when you look at this golden age situation, there's nothing but really bad stuff happening there. And the facade is what we really try to hold on to. It's so hard for our American culture to wrap our brains around what Hector Garcia likes to talk about a lot, is that where there is war, there is rape. And so no one would ever want to think that our soldiers were responsible for rapes all across Europe, but they were. And so we have to really deal with the truth of how things actually were, and the truth of how things actually are now, and how they got so out of control because we pretended things were a certain way. So we never kept our eyes on the things that got out of control. We have a bigger situation to deal with. But I think at the crux of everything is to see things as they are exactly, and not mince or try to paint a better picture.
Exactly.
Was it better for white men back then?
Is it better to be a racist and support segregation?
Well, right. You don't exactly what the Native Americans say all the time. The white man is the sickest man out there because he doesn't know he's sick.
But, to my point, honestly, was it better for white men in this golden age?
Economically, sure. I mean, economically, shelter-wise, education-wise, they got a free education coming back from the war. They were already, well, I don't want to say they're living on accumulated wealth. They had the opportunity to build wealth after the Depression, after the war.
Once again, I'm just fireballing here, all right? What if that's part of what this is? You take a culture of white men, which that's who we're talking about, right? We started the whole thing saying it's these dudes that are going out there shooting everybody. It's not the black kid. It's not a woman, right? I'm don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's a lot of minorities and women that do many, many horrible things, but we're on this topic right now. On this topic, it's white dudes. And what if that's what's going on here? Just trying to be completely objective and just looking at it and saying, if you take a culture that has a certain amount of dominance and a certain amount of ethics built around their system that makes their system work, and it works in their favor, and it works well, at least for them, right? And then you start giving everyone else these rights, and they start feeling like they don't own this anymore, and they don't have investment in this anymore, and they get angry and just go out and shoot each other.
Absolutely. Now, so I think you're right, but let me ask you this question. What makes a 17-year-old do it?
Yeah,
they don't know yet. They don't know yet that the world is limited toward them like it wasn't for their great-grandfather.
Well, they're hearing it all the time. They're hearing you're bad for being a white man all the time. Like if they listen to this one podcast right now, obviously there's depths to this, right? But if they just look at it on the surface, all they're going to hear is white men suck. So I think they do feel a little under attack. I don't know that it's my point to try to say this is a result of
wait a minute.
racism.
So let's not overstate the case. I never heard Carrah say anything like it, and I certainly didn't say anything that generally white men suck.
Of course.
That's not.
No, I know that.
I'm
just saying if they listen to it on the surface.
Okay, then let's speak truth and speak it with clarity. The data point that we're looking at that really is something that should want us to explore, right, is why there is such a huge disparity in the demographics of the active shooters, whether they're at schools or someplace else. The demographics come down dramatically on white boys and white men.
Yes, and that was what I was rushing. I didn't mean to imply that you guys were saying anything negative about that.
Okay.
But my point is just that I think young white males do feel, and everybody listens to be like, oh, here Robert's defending young white males. Let's worry about them. But that's what we're talking about. Let's figure it. Let's be criminal justice investigators, right? Let's figure out what's going on inside their brain. And just because we might have compassion for it doesn't mean we support the violence that they might perform.
Okay.
But my whole point was, I think they do feel a little under attack. If they see somebody putting up a sign that says it's okay to be white, and then everybody gets mad at them. Now, we understand, we're grown-ups, right? We understand, well, you're just saying it's okay to be white as a response to black people getting equal rights. It's a resistance thing. We know what you're really feeling, right? But you're putting that sign up there, and then you get in trouble for it. Or if you were to say, all lives matter, to somebody that isn't really investing in the complexity of what that is, that's just a rebuttal to Black Lives Matter. It's just a way of saying, Black lives don't matter, not any more than anyone else. I'm not going to focus on Black lives. That's all they're doing. But when they see that if they say all lives matter, they immediately get attacked for it. On the surface, they feel under attack. They're just misunderstanding what's really going on. Is that possible? I mean, could that be something?
They feel that they're missing out on something that everybody else is getting. And for a majority of them, it's a social thing too. They're not being included. They're not being looked after. They're not being invited to places.
Accepted.
Yeah, they're not being accepted. They're not okay, so in my talk, it's called Anatomy of the School Shooting. I talk about the school social structure and how it's always geared toward this classist, caste-like way in which the people at the top are usually the higher incomes, people at the bottom are usually the lower incomes. And if you're in that lower part and something exists for you where you can't seem to climb or can't be accepted or can't be included in some way, it hurts. Now, that happens to all of us, right? I mean, we all end up in this horrible social school structure that's really ridiculous anyway. But if you're bullied on top of that, the struggle is double. It's a social thing, I think, that's triggering these people. I don't necessarily think it's, I don't know that it's as specific as we can get. I think it's more of a generalized social isolation that's happening.
So if we controlled for other factors, and I don't have data on this, I'm a very evidence-based thinking, an evidence-based decision maker type dude. But I'll float this question out there, and I hopefully someone has done some academic work on it. Is it possible that one explanation for the demographic of active shooters, is it possible that the bullying that seems to somehow be the impetus behind a lot of these decisions is also occurring with this demographic as a target? It's like, is there a higher instance of bullying in that part of the population? I don't know. I guess I'm just asking a question out loud here.
Well, so Dr. Olius from Norway, I think, he's the one that really zeroed in on the school playground was his research area. And this is where my dad learned that he had PTSD and learned that why he did what he didn't know why he did what he did until the early 80s when he read Dr. Olius. And Dr. Olius was able to say, if you're in the bullying dynamic, which happens to 20% of the boys in school, you have a whipping boy and you have the bully. And so 20% of boys are in this dynamic and it doesn't leave. So if you're in the dynamic beginning in like second grade, you're going to be in the dynamic in sixth grade. You're going to be in the dynamic in eighth grade. And certainly I can see this in my high schools. In the high school I went to, the kid that was getting dumped in the garbage can and rolled through the hallway was the same guy that was getting dumped in the garbage can and rolled through the hallway when I was in fourth grade. Mm-hmm. It was the same person. So it's a dynamic. It's like a fusion they can't get out of. Like any abusive relationship has those dynamics. And so I wonder if it's the longevity of the bullying, the lack of ability to escape, but then also on top of it, those fantasies, those dualistic fantasies of good versus evil and hero versus, victim, things like that. Because remember, the school shooter thinks that they're the hero when they get the gun. They are no longer believing that they are a victim. They are getting control and they are taking action. And my father, in the midst of his insanity, thought that his mother would be very, very happy for him, that he had taken care of his problem.
Wow.
Holy shit.
So it's a solution to something. It's believing that you are solving the issue by getting rid of the people. There is an active problem at hand, not just a worldview.
That means the young white male is in an abusive relationship with America.
Well, while also getting all the benefits.
Yeah, but clearly...
I think we're all in an abusive relationship with America, to be honest with you. But I think that the people at the top tier, they're in an abusive relationship, but they're still getting the shelter, education, and benefits and everything else. They're getting the health care and that's a really interesting point that we need to unpack more. But I still think that you're right. But keep in mind that I think we have to always account for the fact that the white male at the top is always going to be at the top. But the person who's bullied is never going to feel like he's at the top.
Yeah. We've covered lots of different ground here. Have we kind of worked our way back to potentially what causes toxic masculinity? I mean, kind of, is that where we are right now?
That's where you guys were going, and I feel like I kind of ruined that just because I got defensive.
I think permission causes it. You get away with what you think you can. Permission causes this. Because of the dominance, it's the silence that creates the dominance. So the silence of women, the silence of victims, the silence of majority of the people of the world are pretty much allowing, for good reason, to let this happen because their lives are at stake. So your proximity to people in power, you're always going to be more silent the closer you are. The further away you get, the more vocal you'll be.
My silence is simply because I'm really I'm quiet because I'm thinking about it. I'm not being a very good host. But this one,
I think you're being a great host.
This one, well, thanks. But I mean, this one's really been, man, I don't usually feels with each episode, because we do so many debates with religious debates or something. When you go in there, you're like, all right, so if he says this, I say that, or I'll do this queen to rook 4 maneuver or whatever, but this one actually pissed me off talking about it, and I don't know why.
That's a good episode.
It has been. Are we any closer to a solution to gun violence and to school gun violence?
Can we, because we're coming up at the hour mark here, can you guys throw out some potential solutions and then let everybody know where they can find your content and all that kind of thing? And maybe that would be a good way to wrap up. What do you think?
Sure.
That's too quick of a wrap up. Sorry. I started feeling emotions and I pulled back. That's how men do things, people. That's exactly what happened.
Do you know what emotions you were feeling?
Definitely cognitive dissonance was one. You pinged that right away. I don't like how the way I feel is as soon as I start to say, okay, well, let's figure out why these kids are doing this. And we know they're young white males. Maybe young white males are not being treated properly. Everybody goes, whoa, we're not allowed to say that. And I feel like that's exactly the reason that this demographic is acting this way, is because there is something to that. There is something, I don't know. Maybe I'm just focusing on the race end too much.
I think white males need to call out other white males, and that's not allowed. That's definitely not allowed. And I think part of the bullying issue is that white on white thing, is that the bully or the whipping boy is not allowed to call out his fellow classmates and say, you guys are not behaving the way other people do. Remember, we're talking about a small portion. So the generalization really can't be had in terms of this particular discussion. Now, we got big in America and everything, but when we're talking about school shootings, we're talking about 20% of the population of any school, and then you're talking about an even smaller percentage of those who will be prone to violence.
Yeah.
But in that 20%, as you pointed out, Robert, they're all going to be thinking about how to destroy and blow up the school, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to have access to it, though. And then the ones that do, small percentage, that can cause a lot of damage. I will say solutions. Number one, get rid of multiple choice testing. It is the death of critical thinking. It does not allow us to solve our problems. It doesn't allow us to understand subjects. It doesn't allow us to understand anything. And as we move into the world, we're only going to be looking for one answer solutions. And that is the death of any society. So getting rid of multiple choice testing completely will help us be able to create adults that can think through, create full sentences and full thoughts and different layers, and understand things like the word minutia. I think also we've got to have better gun control. We've got to have better oversight of what mental health is and look at the signs of mental health. When I was in high school, I had a class called Decisions, and it was the last time this class was ever taught. And this class taught us about substance abuse, signs of suicide, signs of mental illness, how to survive in the wilderness, and other things about family dynamics, like what a dysfunctional family looks like, what an alcoholic family looks like, signs of drug abuse, et cetera, et cetera. Every single person in the world should have this class so that we can all look at each other and understand each other. We cannot be afraid of each other. The other thing I think we have to look for, and I know this is going to sound so off base, food. We have to eat better. I mean, Lord have mercy. We are shoving horrible things in our bodies and then sending them off to school. We're not eating right. We're not feeding our brains properly. And I'm not going to get into like GMO, gluten. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about real food, just real food, so that we're not, creating brains that can't think properly or sleep properly or do anything to take care of our bodies. The Columbine kids famously chomped down a bunch of McDonald's before they decided to commit their crime. I'm not saying McDonald's leads to violence. I'm saying too much of shit that you eat is not going to lead to a brain that can function or a heart that can function normally throughout a person's life. And everybody can think I'm crazy for saying that, but I really think it matters.
That is one thing that has changed. Earlier in the conversation, we were saying, okay, what's changed if dudes have just always been a-holes? You know what I mean? I'm oversimplifying, of course, but I'm just saying,
right.
What in America changed? And that is a big one. That's a big one.
So the overwhelming majority of members of listeners of this podcast will not be people maybe who need to contemplate the things I'm going to say, but I'm going to start with asking all gun owners to think about what it is that causes them to feel the need to own a firearm or multiple firearms. What underlies that? There's a sort of a saying in the firearm community, and it's gun porn, and it has nothing to do with women. It has to do with dudes standing there with guns, right? And it's it's thought of as sort of gun porn. That there is a masculinization of this idea that the firearm represents manhood and strength, and the men who are living that and who own these firearms need to think deeply about what it is that they have done that ties this firearm to their sense of manhood and strength and power. And only deep introspection can help there. The second thing I'll say, I'll mirror something Carrah said, and that is we have not made particularly good choices in how we manage the ownership of firearms. I won't belabor sort of how I think that should be approached, because there is a whole other podcast episode where Robert, you and I and another third party covered that. But my thinking there hasn't really changed. We could do better. We have some extraordinarily smart people. We have lots and lots of data that responsible researchers and academics have generated for us. And our public policies should be driven by evidence and reason, and we should look at that data and then sit down and make better policies. And I guess those are the two solutions I would offer. But I might add one more thought, and that is, there is nothing okay about bullying. There is absolutely nothing okay about going out of your way to make someone else feel small or belittled. That's ugly. That is awful. And it's time everyone called that out for what it is and stopped it. And if we could end bullying altogether, America would be a better place. And America has done some beautiful things. Dr. King talked about the arc of morality bending toward progress.
Justice.
And we have ended segregation. We have ended the marginalization of the LGBTQ community. We have done a lot of things that have been toward the right direction in the last 50 years. It's within living memory, by the way, that anti-miscegenation laws were on the books. Like, that was in the late 60s that the Supreme Court finally struck down some state laws saying that interracial marriages were going to be illegal. Like, it wasn't that long ago. In a very short time, we've made a lot of progress on a lot of important social questions, and permanently ending bullying, not just by the person who is being bullied speaking up, but by the third parties, the observers, who are neither the bullier or the receiver of the bullying, need to speak out. Dude, that's not okay. And that behavior needs to be marginalized and put in proper context. So that I guess that would be the last thing, would be, let's everybody start thinking about how we treat each other. We can make this a better place to live. We can make the year 2020 America a much better place to be, just by acting in our own communities and helping people to find the right behavior to manifest.
I think also we have to care. I think something that you were saying made me think of that. We've got 300 million guns, no universal health care, no proper understanding or ethic about mental health care. And because we have no deductive reasoning, we can't seem to think that this formula is not tenable. It's not tenable to have 300 million guns with no access to mental health care. This is a powder keg. It's just, I mean, any person looking from the outside at this is like, what the fuck is wrong with you people?
So that's an excellent point.
We all want to die?
That's an excellent point. The NRA likes to talk about the need to improve. Even the NRA is saying, hey, let's improve mental health care. They just don't want to look at the fact that firearms increase violence. Yeah. Anyway, excellent point.
Oh, Owen, where can everybody find your content, brother?
So I am one half of a group called the Skeptical Texans. A partner and I, we are sort of evangelical atheists that live in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. Not a very easy place to be atheists. And you can find us on our website at skepticaltexans.org.
And Carrah, you've got content everywhere. I don't know if there's a single place that we should direct folks.
So I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, where I write a lot. And I've been writing a lot of personal stuff lately, not necessarily related to gun violence, but my talks are on YouTube. Also, Facebook Live has a lot of my talks. I gave talks at Parliament of World Religions in Toronto in 2018. So those all got filmed live on Facebook. So those are on Facebook. YouTube channel has some of my talks. And CarrahQuigley.com, I think, has some articles.
Thank you guys so much. This was, I'm not just saying this like colloquially. This was real. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here.
Good, thank you.
And Carrah, very nice to meet you.
Thank you, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you to Carrah and Owen. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for promoting the Right to Reason to the top 10 atheist podcasts. Thank you to our patrons. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I look forward to talking to you again. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.